Hey there! Today I'm going to talk about a topic on which I have received a number of questions. And that topic, I think, is very rewarding. It is nib smoothing. That is a type of maintenance you can carry out at home if you're careful and you use common sense and you go slow and you take time. That's the basic rules. You're not going to rush this because then you will damage your pen. You're going to use common sense because you don't want to damage your pen. And you just, take it slow, use good lighting, etc. I'm going to show you how to do it, but first I'm going to talk you through some steps, and that may be boring, and I know that it's very tempting to just scroll through the bit where I show you how to do it, but don't do that, because I'm actually giving you some warnings and caveats here, and I want you to understand this. Okay, first of all, any type of pen repair carries the risk of further damage. I think that's pretty much literally the warning that's from Richard Binder's site, and he is absolutely right. If you decide to work in your pens, you may damage them. Don't come running to me if you do so. What I'm showing you here today is purely educational, and I think, again, with a bit of common sense, you can do this, especially nib smoothing. It's not that difficult, but you don't want to go too hard, too fast, etc., because you can actually do damage to your pens. So be careful, okay? Again, I cannot accept any responsibility. I have to say this. Okay, now, it makes sense to read up on what you are trying to do, and for this you will need some type of pen repair book. There are pen repair manuals, usually aimed at a specific brand or maybe even a specific type of pen, but there are also some general books, and two excellent books out there are the book. This is the book, not any book, but the book, by Frank Dubiel, who passed away, but he was an American pen repairman. You can see the book. It looks like it's home printed or something, but do not be fooled. This book contains so much useful information that it's sick. So you need this. It contains information on nib smoothing, of course, but it contains really a lot of good stuff. You can buy this from Richard Binder. Here's another one. This is Pen Repair by Jim Marshall and Lawrence Oldfield. If you have seen my video on fountain pen books, you may remember the book by Peter Twiddle, which I found very enchanting, and it's still one of my favorites. Well, Peter Twiddle is the son of Arthur Twiddle, who passed away, and he was a legendary fountain pen repairman who, invented a lot of tools and did stuff. He contributed a lot. These two guys were his friends, and when Arthur passed away, they collected all of his knowledge in a book. And this book is a bit more colorful and a bit more glossy than the book, and this too contains a lot of information. Now, is one or the other redundant? No, not really, because as these authors point out, this is really, well, not really, but this is focused quite strongly on British pens, whereas the book by Frank Dubiel is focused mainly on US pens. So, two very good books, and of course there's some overlapping information, but the two books are very good, I think. So, if you're serious about fountain pen repair, then I can recommend you get these books and you read through them. Okay, so, as I just said, you need some tools. I'll show you the tools in the practical part of this video, but for now, I would just like to talk you through the process. I have some notes here, and forgive me if I look at them, but I want this to be an informative video, and I don't want to tell you anything that's bad or harmful to pens. So, first of all, you find a pen and you consider the nib to be scratchy. This can happen. This is a Noodler's pen, one of those you get for free with a 4.5 ounce bottle of specific bottle of ink. Nice pens. This one was okay, but I also had a red one, and that was pretty scratchy. So the first thing you would want to do is make sure you find out whether the nib tines are actually aligned properly. I'll show you how to do that in the practical part of the video, but you would need a high-powered loupe for that, and you take a look. So imagine this being the nib tines, right? The two tines of the nib. You want them not to be like this, not like that. You want them to be aligned properly. They shouldn't be like that. They shouldn't be like this or this. They should be aligned properly. You can easily find pictures of this online. There's some excellent articles. So if you can't, picture this in your head, find some pictures online. Okay, so that's the first step. Now imagine I have found that the nib tines are not aligned well. Well, then the first thing to do is to try and align these nibs. You can do that in a number of ways. A lot of people do this with their fingernails, and that makes a lot of sense because it is somewhat, controlled pressure. You could also, I've had some success with a pair of nylon pliers, which is actually a bit of a drastic measure. These are pliers just covered by nylon, so they don't really bite into the steel or the gold, this was steel, of the nib, and you can use that to slightly bend them. When you bend them, I think it's a good idea to bend them as close to the shoulder as you can, not all the way up, because then you will just bend the tip, but you want the entire tine to move, right? Not just the tip part. So imagine, again, there is a lot of information available on this from online, so you can find this. Imagine your nib tines are aligned properly. That was the case with this pen. The nib tines were just fine. The second step, I think, should be, and this was contributed to my knowledgeable contact, make sure whether the tines are actually aligned well in relation to the feed. You would like the tines, the nib, to be, no, let me put this the other way around. You would like the feed to be in the middle of the two tines, right? It should be as aligned as well as you can. Because it is off, I can't really show you that here, but I can do a bit of effort. So this would be a misaligned nib, because the nib is, I can't zoom in. So if this is the nib and this is the feed, you would like it to be something like this, not like this, not like that, because that would be wrong, right? It has to be aligned properly. Okay. What you can get from a lot of sources are very fine, very thin sheets of brass. You can use those to floss the nib tines. And that works fairly well. You can smoothen them out a bit, and I think that the brass is mainly used to open them up a bit, because if you have a tine, so if you have the tines of a nib, you hold it against the light, you should see a small beam of light that passes through the tines. Now if that is not the case, the two tines may be too tightly together. If you gently put a sheet of brass between the tines, you will open them up. And what you would actually like to see is sort of this type of opening. So of course I exaggerate here, but you would like the beam of light to be fairly broad near the breather hole of the nib, which this pen doesn't have, and then as it goes towards the tines, it should become narrower. Because if the tines are open too widely, you get a very wet pen. Sometimes that is what you want. If your pen is too dry, you can try to open them up a bit more, for example with a sheet of brass, and then you will get a better flow, usually. Now, Richard Binder actually recommends burnishing this brass sheet, for example on a glass, so that the edges aren't that sharp anymore, and you don't actually do damage to the inside of the tines. I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, now Richard Binder also discusses on the Fountain Pen Network somewhere using the brass sheets as feeler gauges. You can buy his smoothing kit from his website. I'm not related to the guy in any way, but he sells some really high quality stuff, so that's why I keep mentioning him. Of course, that he's also a repair expert, so okay. He uses these brass sheets as feeler gauges, and you can buy a smoothing kit from him which includes a square inch of brass. That's 2/1000 of an inch thick. You can also buy stuff not from him but from other sources which are just 1/1000 of an inch thick. And he says that you should be able to the 1/1000 of an inch bit of brass should be held gently by the tip of the tines, whereas the 2/1000 of an inch sheet of brass, you should actually use some force to get it through the tines. And his smoothing kit contains this 2/1000 of an inch bit of brass, so you could use that to gently open up the tines a bit. You know, just passing it through the nib slit. Okay, then we come to the actual smoothing, because this was just, you know, somewhat adjustments of the flow properties. The actual smoothing. For smoothing, you can use a buff stick. I've had the best results with that, I think. And you can buy these things again from Richard Binder, probably from other sources too. I'll show you what they look like in a second. But you know, you use these to as an abrasive to smooth the nib. So what I like to do is make, you know, figure 8 patterns on the buff stick, or, you know, infinity signs, and maybe turning the nib a little bit. I'm exaggerating the motion now, but then you should cover every part of the ball of iridium or whatever material it is. So one thing that makes sense is to put ink in the pen when you do that. I didn't do that in the demonstration video because it was an eyedropper pen, but nevertheless it makes sense because it lubricates the nib, and that's a bit easier when you're smoothing it, and also you can immediately test it out. And because I use this pen for the demonstration, because it already was fairly smooth. I really had to do just very minor smoothing, but if your nib is scratchier than that, I would definitely ink it up, and that's what I usually do. Okay. My contact, she recommended doing about 3 to 4 of these figure 8 circuits and then doing a final stroke, and she described this as follows. I usually make about 3 or 4 figure 8 circuits on the smoothing surface, and then I do a final stroke by holding the nib almost horizontally to the smoothing surface and then moving the nib towards me while lifting the pen up. So I'm assuming a motion like this. I'm not sure whether I got that absolutely correct, but I think that's what she means. And then she does a quick writing sample to see whether the smoothing was, you know, actually it worked out. And that makes sense. Okay. She also pointed my attention in the direction of one of the moderators from the Fountain Pen Network, Wim, who is also from the Netherlands, like me. And he says he uses very fine sheets of mylar. I demonstrate these in the well, the practical bit of this video too, but these, I mean, you can probably imagine what a sheet of brass looks like, so I'll show you this right now. This is a sheet of mylar. They have different abrasive properties. Some are a bit rougher than others, and rough is a very big word here. And what Wim does is and I'm pronouncing his name in English, Wim. So what Wim does is he puts these sheets between the tines of the nib, and then, you know, somewhat at an angle, if I understand him correctly, and he gently pulls them through like that. Not the entire sheets. He cuts them to bits, and that smooths the inside of the tines. Then, in fact, I think what he actually manages to do by that is create a nib that is smooth on this side and on that side, so he can write like this. You can also turn the pen around and write the other way. So you are smoothing the inside of the tines. You do not want to overdo that. Of course, that goes for anything. That goes for smoothing with a buff stick too. You don't want to remove too much material. But here, it's very important too, because if you make the inside of the tines too round, you get a syndrome called baby bottom, and that actually hampers the ink flow. So you can smooth the inside of the tines a bit. Also, the useful thing about this is that you can remove some, you know, very small bits of metal that may have gotten in the slit because of the smoothing. And of course you want to have them out, but you don't want to overdo that, because that will actually ruin a nib, and then you can't write with it anymore. So be very careful with that, and only a few strokes, right? Okay. that was pretty much it. So this was a long talk. I apologize. I tried to be as focused as to the point as I could, but I really have to give you this information. So the final thing you would do, you've smoothed your nib, you've done a writing sample, you think, okay, this is smooth. Well, then there's one thing you have to do, and that is check the nib alignment again. So both the tine alignment, you take out your loupe again, once again check out whether the nib tines are aligned properly. As I told you, not like this, not like that, not like this, etc. They should be fine, and the nib should still be in the center of the feed, or the feed should be in the center of the nib, depending on your point of view. But of course, it's logical that the nib may move a little bit because you are smoothing it, you are rubbing it on something, so it could become dislodged a little. Usually with pens, sometimes you can remove the nib and the feed, then it's not really a problem. You can easily reset it. Sometimes you can just push it gently. You see that it's moving there, and then you can push it the other way around. So this should be a very minor step. Okay. What I need now is a big bit of tea, because I've been talking for way too long, and that's a lot better. Down to the practical side. So I say, sorry, but I say this once again, if you do this, use common sense. Go slow, check your results often. You will need a loupe, a high-powered loupe. This is not optional. You need it. It's required for this type of work. Check your results often. If you think things are going wrong, then for heaven's sake, stop. Don't go on, because then you will really ruin a pen. Okay, having said that, I think, nib smoothing can be fun. If anything goes here, it is don't fix it if it ain't broke. Don't try to make a nib that is already smooth even smoother, because I think that is a surefire way to kill it. You only do this on nibs that are really scratchy, and please start with a cheap one. These are pens I got for free with a bottle of ink. I love them. They're great pens, they're nice pens, they were a little scratchy. If I would have completely ruined this, I would have thrown them away without batting an eye, because they're free pens. If you start doing this on your $1,000 pen, the first time you do it, then you have a serious problem. So don't even think about it. Alright, that was way more talk than I usually give you, so it ends here. I hope this was useful. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me, but do understand, I'm not a professional fountain pen repairman, so I may not have an answer. I've given you this information as is. I hope it was useful. I hope this can get you started with nib smoothing. Please read up on the topic. Get repair books. Check out website. There is excellent articles by John Mottishaw, which are available for free, I think, on nibs.com. But just Google it, find information. Information is ammunition, and that will really keep you alive in this field. Okay, so that's it. I hope it was useful, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye. Okay, so I'm going to be smoothing a pen. What do I need? I will need some equipment. One thing I need is a triplet, and by that I do not mean 3 children who are identical or not. I mean a powerful loupe. I'm not sure how well I can actually show you how this works with my camera, but as you can see, this thing really magnifies like there's no tomorrow. So this has a 10 power magnification, which is really useful. I'll come back to that in a second. Then I may or may not need a very thin sheet of brass. You can buy this in hardware stores. I got this from Richard Binder. Actually, like most of the other tools I'm going to show you. Here we have 3-way buff sticks. I'm really not associated with the guy, but I deeply respect him. So here we have buff sticks. You can buy them from Richard Binder. They come with 2 sides. They have 2400 grit, 4000 grit, and 12,000 grit. And according to Richard Binder, you should only use this side for nib smoothing. Now, as you can see, I have used these sides too on very cheap pens, and it worked fine. But I do think there is a point there, and you may actually scrape off too much of your nib with these bits. So you can just use that. Okay. Then you have a micro mesh sheet. I got this these are very mild abrasives, just sheets. You can use two. Although these are interesting, I think these are actually used to smooth the cockpits of fighter jets, etc. So these things are pretty tough and very fine grit, but I found the buff sticks to work best. Okay, so that's actually all you need. Today we will work on this pen, which is one of those free nudeless pens that you get with specific bottles of ink. It's not a preppy, it's a true nudeless pen. Now the issue here is that the nib is a bit scratchy. I can't really show you that, but when I use it, when I go up, I feel a bit of scratch, and while I go down, I don't. So apparently this part of the nib seems to have a bit of an issue. Now the first thing to do, and I can't really show you that, but the first thing to do is check out whether the tines of the nib are aligned well. And I'm just going to show you this with my fingers. I've already made sure that with this nib that the tines seem to be aligned well. But if these are the two tines of your nib, if they're aligned like that, so one is higher than the other, then you've got a problem. Or if they are really open up too widely, then you've got a problem. So what you would like a nib to look like, if you hold it against the light, which is something I can't really show you right now, is a very minor beam of light to pass through the slit of the nib. And this pen actually has that. So what I do not need to do is floss the nib, but that's something I could do. This is something you can do to increase ink flow. So here I got a little sort of punch, which I can use to take out the feed in the nib, which is very useful because they can be a little tight in these pens. So you could use a sheet of brass to gently put between the tines of the nib and floss it, like that. What this does is it opens up the tines of the nib a bit more, and that can be useful because it will increase ink flow. So you don't actually, to increase ink flow, you don't necessarily have to bend the nib, bend the tines open, spread them open. You can just floss it a bit. So I just did that. I think it's also good to occasionally do that to remove paper residue from your nib. It just builds up in the nib between the tines. It just was something that happens under normal writing circumstances. Okay. Now, we have made sure that these tines are aligned well, so the next step is the buff stick. Now, what's important here is that you do not apply a lot of pressure to the pen. So I tend to hold it like this. I found that, for me, that's a comfortable position, and that way I'm not really tempted to push the nib too hard into the buff stick, because the buff stick is doing the work, right? You don't have to, ram the pen in there. It's just that the stick will gently take off a bit of the nib and smooth it out a bit. And I found that what is useful, and I got a bit of an issue here because of the camera tripod, which is slightly in the way, I found that the easiest way to work here is to draw figures 8, and then every now and then rotate the nib a little bit, so that you get all the sides covered. And then some infinity signs, because with this, the nib turns around, right? You sort of touch all the underside parts of the nib. And really, I'm not applying any pressure, so I'm not, pushing into the buff stick. It's a very gentle motion. And that's it. And now what I do is I gently wipe off the nib. I put it under my triplet again, and I check out what I've done. You have to do this regularly. You don't want to take off too much, you don't want to deform it, and the problem is I can't really see it. So I have to take this off camera for a second. That looks pretty smooth to me. So my test was to put it on paper again and see if I still feel that tooth. That's okay. And that's okay. That feels pretty smooth, but I'll just go for one other round. One thing that applies here, of course, is the rule, don't fix it if it ain't broke. You don't want to take a nib to these things if it's working just fine, because no matter what you do, there's always the risk of you damaging the nib, or the same goes for pen repair, I suppose. But in this case, I think the pen can actually, you know, get a little better. Alright, there we go again. Put it to the triplet once more. Whoops, sorry. That doesn't look too bad. In fact, it looks pretty smooth to me. It feels smoother now. It makes a bit more noise, I think, but it actually feels smoother. Okay. Well, quick test. I won't ink it up because it's an eyedropper. I got some Hiroshizuku Momiji. Just dip it in there. Beautiful. I know it makes a noise, but these pens always do. There is no resistance. It really got smoother. So, as you can see, in, you know, what was this, a couple of minutes, I have made this pen quite a bit smoother than it used to be. And it didn't take a lot of effort. It didn't take, you know, any skill. I am not a metal worker. I have no working knowledge of nib grinding, etc. It's just a little common sense and, you know, not too much pressure, a good buff stick, and you're done. So this is how I have smoothed this nib, and a pity I didn't record it because I got another one of these pens, a red one with Nikita, and this one was off quite a bit worse. There was some, when I made this motion, there was some very strong tooth, and then like this it was okay. Well, I think 10 minutes with a buff stick, and this is one of the smoother writers I own. No, it's not an 18 karat gold nib, but still, you know, it's a lot smoother than it used to be. So if you're not afraid to do this sort of stuff, and you know, of course, I'm a little bit apprehensive about taking a 21 karat gold nib to a buff stick, but if you're careful, if you take your time, don't rush it, check your work regularly, right? Use your triplet, you need it, it's not optional, you need it to do smoothing. I think you can actually do this, and you can, you know, make your pens a bit more pleasant to use. And that's all there's to it. So I hope this was useful. Just to be sure again, if you do this, I cannot, you know, accept any responsibility. You choose to work on your pen. I have already emphasized that you know, there's a small risk attached to that. But if you're willing to go for it, I think this can be very rewarding. And that's it. So, have fun, be careful, and make that one scratchy pen a bit smoother. Of course, it makes sense to start with a cheap pen or even a free pen like this, and then move on to more expensive pens if you would like to do it. And if not, then just send your pen to a nibmeister. But of course, I'm not going to send a free pen to a nibmeister to have it smoothened out, right? Okay, so I hope this was useful, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.